know what's crazy? There was a single family that, at one point, held more power than most kings ever did. They didn't command armies. They didn't wear crowns. But they controlled something far more dangerous. Money. Not just money itself, but the flow of it. Who had access to it? Who didn't? And in the world of the 1800s, that kind of control meant you controlled almost everything. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who conquered most of Europe, needed them. The British Empire, the most powerful force on earth at the time, owed them. Entire governments would pause their plans, sometimes for days, waiting to hear whether this family would approve. One of them, Nathan Rothschild, is often quoted as saying, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." Now, did he actually say that? Historians still argue about it. But here's the thing. He didn't need to, because in practice it was true. And the wildest part of all this? This family didn't start in palaces. They didn't start in mansions. They started in a cramped, dirty alley in Frankfurt, Germany. They were Jewish at a time when being Jewish meant you couldn't even leave your neighborhood after dark. You had no rights, no protection, no real future outside the narrow walls you were born into. They had nothing. And then, somehow, they had everything. So how does that happen? How does one family go from literal ghetto life to financing the defeat of Napoleon, buying up half of Europe's industries, and becoming so powerful that conspiracy theories about them still exist today? That's what we're about to find out. But real quick, if you're into stories like this, the kind of history they don't really teach you in school, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe to the Forbidden Archive, and turn on notifications. Because this story doesn't just get interesting, it gets uncomfortable. Alright, let's go back. Frankfurt, 1744. There's a narrow lane called the Judengasse, the Jewish alley. And you need to picture this clearly, because it explains everything that comes next. It's not just narrow, it's suffocating. Over 3,000 people packed into a space meant for maybe 500. Houses stacked on top of each other, floors added wherever there was room, like the city just gave up halfway through planning itself. You could barely see the sky. The air smelled like waste, sweat, and desperation. And the rules were relentless. Jews couldn't leave after dark. They couldn't go out on Sundays. They couldn't gather in groups larger than 2 people. They couldn't enter parks, cafes, or most public places. You weren't welcome. You were tolerated. Barely. This is where Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born. His father survived through small trade, coins, fabric, whatever kept food on the table. Even the family name came from necessity. A red shield hung outside their house. In German, Rothschild. That was it. That became their name. Mayer's parents wanted him to become a rabbi. A quiet life. A respected life. One built on study and faith, not risk. But fate didn't give him that option. Both of his parents died while he was still a teenager. He was 13 years old. And just like that, childhood ended. With his parents gone, the plan for Mayer's life disappeared overnight. There was no money for religious study anymore. No time to sit and learn. Survival came first. So he left Frankfurt and traveled to Hanover, where he found work as an apprentice in a banking house. It wasn't glamorous. He wasn't handling fortunes or making big decisions. He sorted coins, tallied ledgers, ran errands. But while he worked, he watched. And what he saw changed the way he understood the world. Because it wasn't soldiers walking into that bank with confidence. It wasn't generals or warriors. It was princes, dukes, nobles, men with titles and land and power, standing quietly, waiting their turn, asking for loans, negotiating interest, sometimes pleading. And Mayer noticed something most people never do. The man behind the desk, the one holding the ledger, was calm. Because that man didn't need an army. He had leverage. Mayer realized that violence wasn't the source of real power. Money was, or more accurately, access to money. You could have castles, land, flags, uniforms. But if you couldn't pay your soldiers, your servants, your debts, everything collapsed. Mayer spent 6 years in Hanover absorbing this lesson. He learned currencies from across Europe and beyond. Roman coins, Persian coins, Byzantine gold. Not just how much they were worth, but why collectors wanted them. What made one coin desirable and another forgettable. These weren't just coins. They were status. And rich men paid a lot for status. So when Mayer returned to Frankfurt in 1763, he came back different. Sharper, more aware. He knew exactly who had money, what they wanted, and how badly they wanted it. He started trading rare coins. First, it was small, quiet, word of mouth. But then one customer changed everything. Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse. Wilhelm wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the richest men in Europe. Entire fortunes sat idle under his control, waiting to be used. And Mayer impressed him. Found coins no one else could. Charged fair prices. Delivered exactly what he promised. Trust followed. And eventually Wilhelm gave Mayer a title. Court factor. A Jewish financier officially working for a noble house. In that world, that title meant survival, protection, freedom. It meant Mayer could operate beyond the Judengasse without fear of being shut down or expelled. But Mayer didn't stop at gratitude. He paid attention. He watched how Wilhelm invested his wealth, how he loaned money to other royals, how interest worked when the borrower was a government, not a person. And slowly a thought formed. Why am I just handling money for others? Why not lend it myself? So Mayer started doing exactly that. Small loans at first, then larger ones. And as he grew more confident, he taught his sons a single rule that would define the family for generations. Do business with kings, not shopkeepers, not small traders. Kings, governments, because kings borrow big, and they always pay one way or another. It was dangerous. Governments could fall, wars could be lost, but if it worked, you didn't just earn money, you became necessary. Then history cracked open the door. In 1789, France exploded. The French Revolution overthrew the monarchy. King Louis XVI was executed, and every royal house in Europe panicked. Austria, Prussia, Britain, they all feared the same thing. Revolution spreading. So they went to war. And wars, more than anything else, burn money. Armies needed food, weapons, uniforms, horses, gunpowder. Governments needed cash immediately, and they didn't care where it came from. Mayer saw the opportunity. Wilhelm of Hesse had enormous reserves of money. Desperate governments needed loans now. Mayer became the bridge, moving Wilhelm's wealth into the hands of warring nations, and taking a percentage every time, quietly, efficiently. And then he made his boldest move yet. He sent his sons out across Europe. Mayer didn't send his sons out randomly. This wasn't desperation. It was strategy. He had 5 sons, and instead of keeping them close, he spread them across the most important financial cities in Europe. One stayed in Frankfurt. One went to Vienna. One to London. One to Paris. One to Naples. 5 brothers. 5 cities. One family. And suddenly, the Rothschilds weren't just a banking house. They were a network. Information moved faster between brothers than it ever could through official government channels. News of battles, treaties, market shifts, things that took weeks for others to learn, reached the Rothschilds in days, sometimes hours. And in finance, speed is everything. By the early 1800s, Europe was falling apart. Napoleon Bonaparte rose from revolutionary general to emperor, and once he didn't stop. Austria fell. Prussia collapsed. Spain, Italy, much of Germany came under French control. One by one, Europe's old powers were being swallowed. And the Rothschilds were right there in the middle of it. But here's what made them different. They didn't choose sides. Jacob Rothschild, based in Paris, was lending money to Napoleon's government, funding campaigns, supplying credit to the very empire reshaping Europe. At the exact same time, his brother Nathan, now established in London, was financing Britain, the nation determined to stop Napoleon at all costs. It sounds impossible, but it worked because the Rothschilds understood something simple and brutal. War is business. Someone will win, someone will lose. But either way, armies need funding. Governments need loans. And when the war ends, someone has to rebuild. If you're owed money by both sides, you're safe. Nathan, in particular, proved himself indispensable to Britain. The British army was fighting across Spain and Portugal, but paying troops overseas was a nightmare. Shipping gold across enemy territory meant robbery, seizure, or total loss. The British government had struggled with this problem for years. Nathan solved it. He created a system where gold was bought in London, sold in Paris through Jacob, converted into local currency, and delivered to British forces on the ground, without any gold physically crossing hostile borders. It was elegant, fast, nearly invisible, and it worked. Within months, the British government realized something uncomfortable. They weren't just working with the Rothschilds. They depended on them. Meanwhile, Napoleon looked unstoppable. By 1812, he controlled most of continental Europe. Confident, powerful, and convinced of his own brilliance, he made a decision that would undo everything. He invaded Russia. At first, it seemed like another victory. A massive army, over 600,000 men, marched east. The Russians retreated, refusing to fight. Napoleon kept advancing, assuming the surrender would come once he reached Moscow. He reached it in September. The city was empty. Then it burned. The Russians destroyed their own capital, leaving nothing behind: no food, no shelter, no supplies, just ash. And winter was already creeping in. Napoleon ordered a retreat too late. What followed was catastrophe: cold, starvation, disease, attacks from Russian forces. His army disintegrated. Of the 600,000 who marched in, barely a fraction survived the journey back. Europe saw it immediately. Napoleon wasn't invincible. And once that illusion shattered, everything changed. Austria, Prussia, Britain, Russia all formed a massive coalition to finish him off. But finishing a war like that required something enormous: money. And once again, the Rothschilds were ready. As Europe prepared for the final confrontation, every major power needed the same thing: cash. Immediately, armies had to be raised again, weapons produced, supplies moved, governments were bleeding money, and traditional banks couldn't keep up with the scale or the urgency. The Rothschilds stepped in. They organized loans so large they would equal billions today. They funneled money across borders, around blockades, through chaos. By the time the coalition closed in on Napoleon, the war effort itself was being held together by Rothschild financing. In 1814, Napoleon was finally defeated. He abdicated and was exiled to a small island called Elba. Europe exhaled. Kings reclaimed their thrones. Celebrations broke out. Everyone thought it was over. Everyone except Napoleon. In 1815, he escaped. He landed back in France, marched toward Paris, and as he moved, entire regiments switched sides to join him. Panic swept through Europe. The Allies scrambled to raise yet another army to stop him. And once again, they needed money. Nathan Rothschild was in London when word reached him that this would be the final showdown. Everything would come down to one battle: Waterloo. Nathan made a decision that would define his legacy. He bet everything on Britain. While fear rippled through the markets, he began buying British government bonds. Prices were low. Confidence was shaky. If Britain lost, those bonds would be nearly worthless. But Nathan wasn't guessing. He had something no one else did: information. He had built his own private courier network, faster than official government messengers. On June 18, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo was fought. It was brutal, chaotic, and for hours the outcome was uncertain. But when the French finally broke, Nathan's network carried the news across Europe at unprecedented speed. He learned of Britain's victory a full day before the British government did. A whole day. The markets didn't know. Investors didn't know. Panic still ruled. And Nathan did something strange. He began selling. Observers saw the most informed man in London dumping British bonds and assumed the worst. If Rothschild was selling, Britain must have lost. Panic spread. Prices collapsed even further. Then, quietly, through agents and intermediaries, Nathan bought everything back. The next day, the official news arrived. Britain had won. Napoleon was finished, this time for good. Bond prices exploded. Nathan's fortune multiplied almost overnight. Some historians estimate that, at his peak, His wealth may have represented nearly 1% of Britain's entire economy. From one battle, from one decision, was the story exaggerated over time? Possibly. Details blur with legend, but the core truth remains unchanged. He had better information, faster than anyone else, and he knew how to use it. After Waterloo, the Rothschilds became untouchable. They financed railways that reshaped Europe. They helped fund the Suez Canal. They backed industries, mines, and governments. Britain even borrowed millions from them to end slavery across the empire. They also gave back, funding hospitals, schools, libraries, famine relief, and Jewish communities under persecution. But power breeds resentment. Rumors turned into conspiracies. Influence became accusation. And much of the hatred aimed at them was fueled by old, ugly anti-Semitism. When the Nazis rose to power, the Rothschilds were targeted. Banks seized, properties stolen, family members arrested or forced to flee. Entire branches collapsed. Yet the family survived. Not as loudly, not as visibly, but still there. Today, the Rothschilds remain involved in finance, wine, and investment. Their true wealth is unknown. They're private. They don't chase attention, but their legacy is undeniable. It all started with a boy from a ghetto, a 13-year-old orphan who learned that information moves faster than armies. They didn't conquer with swords. They conquered with knowledge. And in the modern world, that's still the most powerful weapon of all.